How are we doing? Good to be with you. Yeah, welcome in. Again, friends, I'm doing these lives. I'm trying to go live once a week on YouTube because there are things that I want to talk about or do that I don't want to do alone. So I figured let's just go live on YouTube and do it with people in the moment, and whoever wants to tune in can tune in. And on this live, I'm going to be rewatching a debate I had with a self-described Christian nationalist. I'll give you guys the context. And honestly, I'm just trying to see how I did from an outsider's perspective, because when you're in it, that's one thing. When you are watching yourself back, that's another thing. And I like doing that for feedback's sake, but again, I don't want to do it alone. So I'm going to do it here on YouTube for the whole world to see. Titan, I just want to say that you say here you would love nothing more. Oh, that's the wrong screen. Oh, no, I don't want to ban you. Hold on, friends. Here we go. Get rid of this. Bring you in here. There we go. I would love nothing more than TNE blueberry coffee I could buy. My 7-Elevens have Jack. Well, here is my 7-Eleven mug with blueberry coffee inside of it. That is fresh. That is good. Yeah, maybe one day I'm not going to ban you. My screen's all messed up. Anyway, friends, good to be with you. Again, thanks for making time to hang out with me. So let's go through this. I'll kind of set it up. Before I do, I don't know why this is giving me such a hard time. I want to preview something. Again, I'm doing more of these lives than I ever have before. And next week, we'll be going live again. I'm going to be responding to a series that Tim Barnett and Elisa Childers did for Focus on the Family about the danger of deconstruction. Now, I'm bringing on a scholar, Kevin Carnahan. He's a friend of the show. He's been on many times before, and we're going to go through a couple of their videos and respond to it in real time. So make sure that you are subscribed to the channel so you get notified when we go live next week. It'll be a lot of fun to do it with you again live. And if you're watching this video right now, if you could do me a favor and like this video, that would be so awesome. It helps YouTube know that people are digging what we're doing here, and it helps it get seen into the algorithm. Haley, I know I should have given you a trigger warning. I should have. I'm sorry. I should have, but I didn't. But yeah, I got this. We have a private Facebook community, and someone tagged me in it and said, Focus on the Family is doing this free video series on deconstruction with Tim Barnett and Elisa. So I signed up for it. I got the course. We're going to condense it, and then we're going to go from there. So that's kind of the update. Let's see. Hold on one second. Make sure post is up for live. I was texting my assistant. Anyway, so yeah, so that's what we're going to be doing next week. So again, make sure you tune in. All right, so let me kind of set up the stage here. By the way, if you're new to the channel, if you're just watching, my name is Tim. I'm the creator of the New Evangelicals, which is much more than a YouTube channel. We help people find a better path forward in their faith, rooted in love, justice, and inclusivity. That's what we're here to do. So hello, friends. I see all the chat to my right. I see Elijah. I see TY. I see Haley. I see Kitty. Hi to all of you. Thank you for being here. It means so much. So here's the setup. And again, please like this video if you're watching. That means the world. This is a debate I did. I got to be honest. I don't do debates, really, a whole lot. I'm not into debates. I'm not into doing them because the whole point is to have good faith dialogue. I don't like doing the liberal owns conservative owns liberal. That's like not my take. But I got into a bit of a spat on X, formerly Twitter, with the guy in the top right-hand side. His name, can you see my mouse here? You can. This guy here. His name is Kenton Little. And he essentially was like, we should talk about this. I would love to... Oh, it was in response to our Missionary to the Christian Nationalist video that me and April did. He was like, I would love for you to knock on my door. And then this guy on the top left here who hosts this podcast, Dead Men Walking, he's like, hey, how about I host you and Kenton for a little friendly debate? And I said, okay, I will do it. I don't know. I was feeling charitable that day. Kenton Little he doesn't really have a huge platform. He attends a small church, but he wanted to debate me because he's a self-described Christian nationalist. So we did. Now, my goal in this video is just to watch it back with you to see how I did, maybe talk a little bit more about things that I couldn't mention, and then we'll kind of go from there. So this is a pretty chill episode. I mean, I'm going to be drinking coffee and kind of being casual. I would love your comments as we're going through to see what you think about this. It's always good to get feedback on what I can do better when it comes to how we engage Christian nationalism and how we critique it. So that's what we're going to do. Are you ready? If you are, give this video a like. Oh, the things you do as a YouTube creator. Okay, let's get into it. Here's the beginning of this video. I trimmed out some of the banter. The only thing you should know is that we each got up to 10 minutes to explain our position for the thesis, is Christian nationalism a benefit to society? Okay, that is the general thesis. Let's see how I did. I'll pause as we go along. Good to see all of you. Leave your comments in the chat. Here we go. Okay, so the question tonight, though, is, does Christian nationalism help society? It's not, is it biblical, or if there's a theological argument for it. Okay, that isn't the conversation tonight. I'm going to imagine that Kenton will probably be using a lot of Bible verses to justify why Christian nationalism is biblical and therefore good for society. But even if it was biblical, I don't think it is to be, which, by the way, to be clear, I don't think that it is. But let's just say it was. That doesn't mean it's automatically good. I mean, I don't think slavery, for example, is a good thing, despite the Apostle Paul telling slaves to obey their masters. And that was a very common proof text used by American slaveholders to justify why owning slaves was biblical. So just because something is in the Bible doesn't automatically make it good. But again, to be clear, the argument is not, is it biblical or theological? It is, does it help society? That's the
we
thesis
already defined the
in this
term
video.
Christian nationalism, which, by the way, the foundation of that definition comes from sociologist Andrew Whitehead, who was one of the leading voices and scholars on Christian nationalism. So there is empirical data that fuels that definition.
Oh, just heads up. So we had to figure out a definition, a working definition. I brought Andrew Whitehead's definition to the table. Let me see if I can grab it for you guys, just so I can read it, because I want to make sure that we're on the same page here. I'm not sure where I said it in the beginning of the video. Let's see. I did it. Where's my tech? Oh, here we go. So okay, here's how I defined it. Christian nationalism is a cultural framework that idealizes and advocates for a fusion of a particular expression of Christianity with American civil life. It holds that this version of Christianity should be the principal and undisputed cultural framework in the United States, and that the government should vigorously preserve that Christian framework. The only thing that Kenton wanted to change is that he would say conservative Christianity, and he would also say with any particular nation, not just the United States of America. But we essentially agreed on that definition, FYI.
You can look up his work. I'm not just pulling it out of my hat. Kenton tweaked it a little bit, but the general gist is the same. So to be clear, a couple things here. My answer to does Christian nationalism help society is no. It does not overall. It helps a particular set or sect of society, perhaps, mostly, I would argue, conservative white people and minorities who would assimilate into the worldview. But everyone else is usually targeted by Christian nationalism for one reason or another. And to be clear, too, I did have a definition of society here. Where is it? It's defined as the aggregate of people living together in a more or less ordered community. So it is a pretty broad definition tonight. So just a couple of pieces of evidence here of why I think Christian nationalism is not good for society or doesn't help society. First off, we can look at some individuals who talk about Christian nationalism. Stephen Wolfe, for example, the author of The Case for Christian Nationalism, said that under Christian nationalism, blasphemy laws are enforced and that we should throw atheists in jail. So it's certainly not good for the atheists in our society to be under the rule of Christian nationalism, because they'd be thrown in jail if Stephen Wolfe got his way. Joel Webbin says that every form of contraceptives should be ripped off the shelves of CVS. So it doesn't help people who want or maybe even need contraceptives for other health reasons besides using them as birth control. And by the way, Joel Webbin in particular also agreed with a Confederate apologist on his show that most of the abolitionists will be in hell, which I think is telling about how Joel and many Christian nationalists, especially in that sect, view slavery and racism, which again does not benefit society at all. It actually only harms many in our society. So you might argue that I'm just pulling, random arbitrary examples of two men, who hold no power. But we do have data on how Christian nationalists view all kinds of topics. For example, 80% of Christian nationalists don't believe in living in a society where other people are allowed to practice their religion. So for the people currently in our society right now who are not conservative Christians, Christian nationalism does not help them at all. It's actually very bad news for them. And again, I go back to what Stephen Wolfe said about throwing atheists in jail. I know, for example, Doug Wilson wants to put Jesus Christ as Lord in our Constitution, which again does not help at all other people in our society who would hold to no such belief. 40% of Christian nationalists believe that things have gotten so bad that true American patriots may have to resort to violence to save the country. 4 out of 10. And again, I hope we all agree on this call and this chat that if violence is not good in any form, that does not help the country or benefit society. So I'm not going to, take all 10 minutes. I really want to get into more of discussion, but there's plenty of reasons why I believe that Christian nationalism, as it's defined, does not actually help society. It might help certain people in this society who would adhere to its views, but everyone else is probably seen as an enemy of said Christian nationalism, and therefore, if Christian nationalism gets its way, enemies of the state and such. That does not benefit society.
I gotta say, thank you. I gotta say, I'm pretty happy with that opening statement. Like, I feel like I said what I needed to say. I stuck to the general thesis. Does Christian nationalism benefit or help society? I gave several of examples after defining society that it doesn't. Someone asked me here in the chat, what did I do to prepare for this debate? And really, besides this opening monologue that I kind of typed out, not a whole lot. I mean, I watched some of Kenton's stuff. I knew that he was going to get real theological, but that's why I tried to be really clear on the thesis is, does it benefit society, not is it biblical, which is a whole different argument for many reasons. So that was my opening. Let's see what Kenton had to say.
Kenton, would you like to kind of give your opening statement? Same thing, kind of where you land on Christian nationalism, how you came to that conclusion, and then and I'm assuming you're taking the other side of this, does Christian nationalism benefit society?
Yeah, so thank you. First of all, I want to say this whole conversation came together because I replied to a skit or a video that you put out, Tim, where you talked about evangelizing Christian nationalists. And I said, Tim, I will DM you my address if you come and evangelize me. So what I want to say is I want to reiterate that invitation. If you're ever in Texas or in Houston next time, please hit me up.
This could make a good YouTube video, FYI.
And I will invite you over to my house and I will cook you a steak dinner.
I'm in.
Ooh.
Awesome. So
I'm in.
We're talking about Christian nationalism today, and we're talking about the subject, does it help society? Does Christian nationalism help society? And we've already been given a definition of that. What I want to frame is that Christian nationalism is the idea, a more simplified definition, that Christian nationalism is the idea that the nations ought to base their laws and their customs on what God has revealed in his word. And this comes from the foundation for this idea is based on what Jesus said before he ascended into heaven. His final words, the Great Commission, the words of our Lord, right? If all of us are professing Christians, we should all affirm what Jesus has commanded us. His final commandment before he ascends into heaven, Matthew chapter 28, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. So the Great Commission provides us the foundation for Christian nationalism. What it is that Jesus is making the claim that all authority on earth has been given to him. And because of his authority, because the earth belongs to him, his disciples should go, and the language that he uses is make disciples of the nations, baptize the nations, and teach the nations to observe all that God has commanded, all that Christ has commanded. So if Christ's commandment is that we should make disciples of the nations, then the question is what Christ is commanding good for the people he's commanding it for? Well, who is Christ? Again, we are all Christians in this conversation here. We all claim to be Christians in this conversation here. And so we all believe that Christ is the second person of the Trinity, that he is indeed God, and therefore that he is the creator of all things, that he created heaven and earth, right? Tim, would you agree with that?
That Jesus created the heaven and the earth?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. I
affirm the Trinity. I affirm virgin birth, resurrection, from all that.
One of the benefits, really quick, first off, I didn't say how he did it. Evolution, obviously, but I didn't want to trigger Kenton. But number two, one of the benefits about being a quote-unquote Orthodox Christian, according to conservative evangelicals, is that I can say, without lying to them, I do affirm the virgin birth and the Trinity, all that stuff. And we still see the rest of this stuff so differently. So anyway, I'll keep going.
Awesome. Fantastic. And so what we understand, all three of us, is that God created all things. and then he called all things very good. And so if he created all things and he created all things very good, then we can infer from that that all things that he commands are for the good of the people he created it for. So if God's commandments are fundamentally good, and Jesus commanded that the nations should bow down and obey him, that we should go and disciple the nations, that the nations should be baptized in the Trinitarian name, then what we say when we say that Christian nationalism is fundamentally not biblical or fundamentally not good for society, what we're saying is that that thing that God has commanded, what Christ has commanded that we obey, is not good for society. What we're doing is we're taking our own wisdom, and we are putting our own wisdom above what God has commanded and putting ourselves in his place to say, no, I have more knowledge about how the world works. I know what's better for society than what Jesus does. So if Christ has claimed that all authority belongs to him, and based on that authority that we should go and make disciples of all nations, that the nations should obey him, he's doing that for our good and for his glory. Everything that God commands, he commands for our good and for his glory. He says all things work together for good to them that love God and to those who are called according to his purpose. So what we're talking about is it good for society? And what we're going to get into when we're talking about that is what constitutes good for society, right? Is being a part of another religion that is opposed to the religion of Scripture. Is that good for society? Is being homosexual good for society? Is abortion good for society? Is these things...
I should probably preface, trigger warning, he says a lot of things that are very not good, especially around queer people, just FYI.
Are these things, these cultural issues that Christian nationalists like myself would oppose, are they good for society? Or should we affirm all these things in opposition to what Christ has commanded in his word? And so Christian nationalism is good for society because Christ does not command things that are not good for the people he created.
Okay.
Okay. Notice how there's like no actual examples, right? Like if I'm going to steel man his position, if I was Kenton and I was like, I believe that we have to disciple the nations, I would look at the teachings of Jesus, like to heal the sick and feed the poor, and be like, look, as a Christian nationalist, I believe that the nation I inhabit should be Christianized to make sure that poor people are taken care of and that sick people are healed, because Christ's commands tell me to go do that. But he doesn't. I mean, and I'm going to kind of interrogate the presuppositions that he has. What commands are we talking about? What do you mean God's word, etc.? It was the opening statement for me. I knew I was going to be in for it because there are so many things that he assumes that he has never interrogated before that we have to unpack to get to the main point. And again, I define society in my talk, essentially a collection of people. So it's not good for all of society. Getting rid of queer people hurts queer people. That's part of society. But for Kenton, the true society he's talking about is a Christian society. So let's see where we go from here.
Yeah, so that's kind of gives us a little taste of where both of you guys are at. Now the fun starts. Let's just discuss among ourselves. So you guys laid out two really different ideas there. It looked like
we did.
Kenton, you kind of replied a little bit more to what Tim said, so maybe I'll throw it back over to Tim. Tim, do you have a question for him, or do you have maybe a response to what he just said about, even quoting
My head
Matthew?
is spinning here.
I have 1,000 questions. I want to try and be succinct, though. I mean, one of the big ones. Listen, I mean, I could argue why even the idea of a nation in Jesus' time is not the same thing at all to how we think about nations today. But that gets us in the weeds. I'll for sake of argument, I will not address more of the theological perspective on that side. My biggest question is, and this will get really, I think, to the core of our disagreement, is what are God's laws in the Bible that are prescriptive for a nation? Boom. And then how do you decide? So is God commanding Israel to wipe out the nation next to them? Is that one of God's laws that we should be applying for certain circumstances? Is it certain ones in the Levitical law, in the Torah? Is it the teachings of Jesus? When you say God's law, I hear this all the time. What laws are exactly we talking about? And then how do you define, or how do you even get to which ones in the Bible would be prescriptive versus descriptive? Because to me, as far as I can tell, it seems a lot of, and by the way, I don't mind this, but I just feel like Christian nationalists aren't honest about this. A lot of picking and choosing. James 5, for example, is a pretty clear condemnation of rich business owners who exploit their workers for unfair wages. Yet that's not, there's no talk about holding Elon Musk, for example, to account for him being able to profit unfairly off of his working class, despite James 5 being clear. We could say that's one of God's laws. So I'm just kind of curious for you how you think about what God's law is and what these definitions and parameters are and how you get there.
So yeah, good question. One thing that I would ask as a point of clarification is when you say, Christian nationalists pick and choose, and you give the example of James 5, do you have any other examples?
Well, we can go. Listen, I can go down the.
I love that. Sorry, I just love that. Like, okay, Tim, I know that I said the whole Bible is God's word, but not that part. Like, do you have other examples? It's like, how many do you want? 1 Timothy 6. So many scriptures in the Torah. It's just amazing to me. Anyway,
stereotypical route, right? Of like, should I have a clothing made of 2 different polymers? Should I be able to eat lobster or not? Those are all commands given by God. We could and I'm sure we would agree they were given to God for a certain people for a certain time, but that's the crux, is how do you decide which laws in the Bible? And there are a lot of them. Some could be applicable, some might not be. How do you decide what God's law is when you use that term? Like, what's the definition for that?
Okay, so yeah, what I'm gonna state is, and I'm sure you're familiar, if you're familiar with guys like Joel Webb and Doug Wilson, Stephen Wolfe, some of these guys on the Reformed Christian Nationalist side, are you familiar with the threefold division of the law?
Yes.
You mean like ceremonial,
civil, and moral, right?
Yeah, I'm very familiar.
And so what I would say is, when
I kind of overstated my case there. I'm familiar. I'm no Dan McClellan, though. So keep that in mind. My bad.
We're talking about God's law. And I don't have the citation in front of me, but we look at the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews is going to tell us that the ceremonial law of God specifically has been totally abrogated, right? And so the way that the confession that I subscribe to, the 1689 confession, is going to say is that we should obey and subscribe to, or we are not beholden to God's law other than the general equity of that law. So what we are going to, or what I advocate for as a Christian nationalist, is that the moral law of God is universal, right? The 10 Commandments, the summary law of the moral law, or the summary of the moral law written in the 10 Commandments, is a universal principle. Romans chapter 2 tells us that the moral law of God is written on the hearts of men. And so
one of the hard parts about this line is that it's so hard to unpack because he's jumping all over the place. The 10 Commandments, Hebrews, Romans, like you're just trying to keep up with the whiplash, right? Because for people like Kenton, it seems like they view the Bible as one monolithic book in English. And all you have to do is just kind of pick the verses and connect the dots, almost like a puzzle, to then paint the picture you need. So this is why I argue that Christian nationalists and fundamentalists don't actually take the Bible seriously enough. They can't take it on its own terms. They can't take it in its historical context. They literally colonize it and they pillage it and extract from it a certain theology that puts them, or gives them, the theological justification to be in charge over their neighbors. And it's just hard to unpack that in a debate format like this.
Based on that moral law, we extrapolate and exegete all the other laws that God has given and define them based on how they've been applied in the Old Testament to that particular people, and we apply that law based on the moral law to our present day. Does that make sense?
Just 2 things. Number one, because we're debating, don't mind me if I'm a little bit aggressive. I don't mean it in bad faith. I just get really into this stuff. So I just want to preface that. But you're really all over the place here. First, you're appealing to the 1689 confession. Then you're appealing to the 10 Commandments. Then you're quoting 2 Corinthians. So is there a standard set of laws that you would say this is God's law? And again, if the Bible is the inspired word of God, as you would hold, and you're a biblical inerrantist, why are you comfortable being able to subscribe to the 1689 confession as authoritative over what's clearly in the Bible? And this is the riddle I can't solve. By the way, just to be even more clear, this idea of the threefold division, ceremonial, moral, I think whatever that third is, that's also not inherent to the Hebrew Bible. That those categories are not in the text. They're added on by people reinterpreting what these laws mean and how they function.
Well, why do you claim that
like,
it's a reinterpretation?
Well, because if I read the biblical law to you about not having mixed fabrics, you would interpret that law and say, no. Even though it doesn't say it in the text, there's a reason why that law falls underneath this.
I believe that's found in Leviticus chapter 18. In that context, talking about mixed fabrics, what is the purpose behind that law?
You tell me.
Well, I'm asking you because when you look at the surrounding laws, they're about not mixing fabrics, right? And there's a bunch of other laws in that surrounding context about not mixing things. The point is, in Israel, in national Israel at that time, at that place, they were supposed to be a peculiar people set apart for a specific purpose. That purpose was to bring about the Messiah, right? God promises Abraham in Genesis chapter 15 that he will, that his offspring will be a blessing to all nations. And so the purpose behind that law, not mixing fabrics, and the reason that I can say that we're not beholden to that law is that the moral purpose behind that law was to further explain the difference and the separation that Israel had with other nations. And so because I'm not an Israelite, and because true Israel has come, because Christ has come and has fulfilled that law, we're not beholden to it. But we are still beholden to what is written in God's moral law. We're still beholden to not commit adultery, to have no other gods beside the one true God, to not have any graven images, not to murder, not to steal. We're still beholden to the moral law of God.
Okay, can I ask you guys a question out there in the chat who are watching this? I don't know what he said. I still don't. I just rewatched this back for the first time since we had the conversation. I don't follow the logic at all. So mixing two fabrics is contextual because of the Messiah, but like you still have to listen to the other commands. Like listen, seriously, if there's a rhyme or reason out there that I'm missing, put it in the comments so I can read, because I am totally lost already, and we're like a quarter of the way through this thing. By the way, if you're here and you just joined, thank you. We're watching a debate I did with a Christian Nationalist a few weeks ago. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't yet. Give this video a like. If you want to support the work that we do, all super chats go to supporting the organization to make this kind of content and all of our other content possible. Thanks so much, friends. Like I said, would love to get your thoughts on what I'm missing in what Kenton just said.
And I mean this all due respect. That's just made up. Like what you said about like the fabric thing representing not mixing things, and that's the interpretation. Like, where do you get that from? Is it in the text somewhere? Is there a commentary that you can cite? I need actual evidence for why that's a biblical interpretation. Like Leviticus 18 is in the same passage where you talk about not having sexual relations with other types of people. Okay, including I believe this is the passage in here. I think it's in here also where it mentions don't sleep with people of the same sex. So can we agree then that if you're going to argue against this stuff, the Levitical law as a whole should be tossed out, and we can go then to the teachings of Jesus as far as God's law? I'm just trying to understand, when you say God's law, what are we actually talking about here? Like, what are the parameters besides, oh, well, that's moral, that's ceremonial, even though, again, the text never says that. You're adding that into the text. Is it the teachings of Jesus? Because I would love to go there, and we can compare and contrast what Jesus teaches us versus Christian nationalism. But what is this God's law thing, and where are we getting it from that is steeped in some kind of objective reality?
When you say, where does God's law come from? Right. What I've been explaining is that the moral law of God provides the framework. The summary of the 10 Commandments provides the framework for the laws that we should implement into society. So when I talk about Christian nationalism, what I'm saying is that our laws should reflect the moral framework of the 10 Commandments.
Okay, 10 Commandments. So we're getting rid of the other laws that God gave the Israelites. That's not part of God's permanent moral law. The 10 Commandments is it.
I would say that there are laws within the law that God has given to Israel that reflect principles from the 10 Commandments. And those laws are applicable in some way to us.
Notice that in the 10 Commandments, there's no law against, as he put it, homosexuality, right? I mean, there are all kinds of laws that they advocate for. Christian nationalists that wouldn't. Contraceptives aren't mentioned. Abortion isn't mentioned. There's so many things that aren't mentioned in the Ten Commandments, but this part was really hard. I mean, it wasn't hard because, guys, I wasn't like frustrated with him. I was just frustrated that I couldn't get a clear answer. I love clarity. I love clarity. I try and be clear. And frankly, as I'm watching myself back, when I get really worked up, I kind of go, and sometimes what I'm saying isn't as clear as I think. So that's a good learn for me when I'm having these conversations. But my gosh, like I still, even rewatching this, do not know what is the list of God's commands in the Bible that we have to now impose on American culture. I still don't know.
Okay, got it.
Beneficial. I'll use the word beneficial.
Got it. Do you have questions for me? I don't want to hog all the question time.
Well, you said let's go to the words of Jesus. What specifically do you think that Jesus says that would oppose Christian nationalism?
Blessed are the meek. Love your enemy as yourself.
Softball question,
things
bro.
About how rich people aren't going to enter the kingdom of heaven. That's just a few to get started. I mean, Christian nationalism is built on the ethos of we're in charge and we rule. The whole teaching and life of Jesus is that he bore a cross for his enemies. Christian nationalism believes in crucifying theirs.
Is authority inherently bad?
No, of course not.
So then why is it bad to have, in a Christian nationalist framework, what we have is that we want Christian principles to govern society, right? Why
well, you don't. You want some. You don't want your enemies loved in a Christian society. You want to throw them in prison. Okay, so is throwing an atheist in prison a Christian ethic? Is that loving your enemy?
What would we throw the atheist in prison for? Because
for blasphemy, according to Stephen Wolfe, who authored the book,
right?
The Case for Christian Nationalism. I'm just quoting people who claim the Christian nationalist mantle, and he did say, under Christian nationalism, women are not leading in any major capacity, and atheists are thrown in prison. I'm all for blasphemy laws, by the way. That's an actual quote from him. So I'm just asking, how is that loving your atheist neighbor by throwing them in prison just for being who they are?
What constitutes committing blasphemy under his framework? And what you're getting at there is that if an atheist breaks the law of God, right, and has another God before him, or takes the name of God in vain, under that framework, then we can have civil penalties for them. And
I mean, I have a question. Look, I want to be charitable. I don't think that Kenton speaks for every single Christian nationalist out there. Okay, this is a funny comment. Again, I am an atheist. Yeah, exactly. But there's so much talk in the right-wing Christian nationalist ethos of free speech, right? Elon Musk is a free speech warrior. Protect the First Amendment. And then Kenton's like, well, define blasphemy. You know, I mean, if they take God's name in vain, we can throw them in prison. The government that we would rule can throw them in prison for blasphemy. Like, wait, I'm sorry. So do we care about the First Amendment and free speech? Or do we want to imprison people who say things like, oh my God? Because that's what he's talking about, right? Which, by the way, even that particular point about taking the Lord's name in vain is not talking about saying, oh my God. It's such a deeper meaning, but I digress. Like, what are we doing here? What are we doing here, Kenton? You're really taking the bait, dude. Like, you're not even trying to say Stephen Wolfe is a radical. I would never adhere to his version of Christian nationalism. He's really trying to rationalize why blasphemy laws would be okay, and also, according to the thesis, a net benefit for society. My mind is blown. If you're just joining, please like this stream. It would mean a lot. Let's keep going.
The question, right, the original question of, is that good for society? Is being an atheist, is rejecting the foundation of all of creation, is that good for society?
The problem is that you're so stuck in your worldview, you really think that you have some objective reality about the moral universe that no one else has ever thought about or has ever philosophized about. There are legit
is that even a word?
Atheists who have legit things to say that could absolutely benefit society. Not even religiously speaking, just in general as a human being. Maybe they're an engineer, maybe they're an electrician, maybe they love their family really well. So let's just get real pragmatic for a second. Let's say you have an atheist in your society who has a family and has kids, and they break the moral law of God by, I guess, not claiming Christ as Lord, and they're thrown in prison. And their kids grow up with a dad or a mom in prison. Can you explain to me how that benefits society? I want real brass tacks reality. I don't want ethereal nonsense. This is the implication of what you're talking about. So how is that good for society? For two kids to potentially not have a family?
I wouldn't throw an atheist in prison for, quote, not professing Christ as Lord.
Oh, thank God,
and Kenton. I probably wouldn't throw an atheist in prison for even publicly denouncing Christianity. In fact, I'm a little hairy on the whole prison punishment as a punishment period. So that period, that wouldn't be an issue.
How about
throw an atheist in prison?
How about the gay man who has a family? Would you throw him in prison for being gay?
I would reject I would reject the claim that the gay man can have a family.
Oh, so
he repents of his homosexuality.
Great. Let's get again brass tacks for sake of argument. Let's forget about what you believe. I understand that. I grew up the same way. I get that. In America, as we speak right now, I personally know several people who are married to a partner of the same sex who have children, and all those children have known are those two people as the parental figures in their life. You get power tomorrow to do whatever you want as a Christian nationalist. Tell me what happens to that family unit. You don't have to accept it in your theology as a real family, but whatever you want to call it, they are together, and those kids look to those people as their guides and sustainers financially, etc. What happens to those two people and those two kids?
I don't think that it is good for children to be in a household where that household is predicated on two men with disordered desires that have broken God's law, that are daily committing adultery.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
There are plenty of examples of homosexual families, quote families, they're not families. You're not defining marriage properly. Those children would be taken out of that situation. That is an abusive situation.
Okay, let me let me clarify what Kenton just admitted to being in favor of. Kenton just said that if he was in charge, aka if he was the state, if he was the government, he would have no problem using the power of the government to go to someone else's house and separate their families based on a religious fundamentalism that he believes is objectively true and should supersede the well-being of those kids in that family. AKA, Kenton just submitted to doing the very thing that so many Christian nationalists think the government is doing right now to Christian families. See, this is why I try and tell you all the time that Christian nationalism does not actually care about a small government or a limited government or freedom. They care about getting access to the power of the government to impose their will on other people. Kenton, who self-describes as a Christian nationalist, openly says the quiet part out loud, which I gotta say, I really appreciate Kenton doing. I appreciate that Kenton has the guts to say, yep, in my view, two people of the same sex are disordered and their kids cannot be healthy in that situation. And if I had the power of the state behind me, I would break up that family unit because in my worldview, that's not a real family. And I don't care what those people think. I don't care what the family actually thinks. I don't care how well loved those kids are, what those kids want. My dogmatic worldview based on religious zealotry is going to usurp that, and I'm going to wield the power of the state to separate that family. Where do those kids go? Do they go to foster care? Let's see if Kenton actually answers that.
By who? By the state, and where would they go? Oh, there we go.
In a perfect Christian nationalist society,
yeah,
they would go to the church. And the church would find them new homes. They would be adopted by good Christian families.
And you think that benefits them, ripping them away from their parental figures? Wow. Okay.
Absolutely.
That's unreal. It's unbelievable.
It really is. Like, I stand by that same comment. It is unreal. You think that the church, in particular, the white evangelical fundamentalist church, is a safer space for kids than two loving parents? Have you not seen the Southern Baptist Convention's systemic abuse that they hid for over a decade? Now, Kenton comes from the IFB Church, Independent Fundamentalist Baptist Church, and he left it behind because he saw the abuse. With all due respect to Kenton, you are quite literally out of your mind if you really think that kids separated from their families are better off in the church than they are with a family who has two same-sex couples or two same-sex people as a couple. I mean, just mind-blowing. But this is what many Christian nationalists would totally be in favor of. You bet your ass that Ali Stuckey would be in favor of the state doing this. 100%. Mind-blowing.
Now, I would say we have, just to interject here, I don't want to interject too much, but a couple things that I just throw out there for thought too is, Kenton, I heard you talk about general equity, which is where I'm closer to. You know, if you look in Leviticus about if someone doesn't contain their ox and it bores a man, well, then that man faces the death penalty. I would say the general equity of that law, it could be something like vehicular manslaughter or something like that, to where if you have a tool at your disposal, or even look to Alec Baldwin, who accidentally shot someone, he claims, or doesn't claim, whatever happens there, you have responsibility. If you take a life, you could be held responsible with your life, even if it is accidental. So there, in Christian nationalism, and the one that I would say would be the only one that would work properly, would be a general equity, meaning we're not going law for that time for Israelites, but we're pulling the general equity of that law. And we have so many of those examples today.
So great point to this host, which, by the way, he did a really good job overall, but he's essentially admitting what I said earlier, that like we all interpret the Bible, right? It's not word for word. What he's saying is that we look at a law in the Bible, whatever one you want to talk about, and we look for like the deeper general meaning of what that law is saying, and then we apply it. But of course, what they skip is that your cultural framework, how you were raised, your historical context are all going to shape what you think is the general equity of that law. That's what they miss. And that's what I was trying to point out earlier with Kenton is like, dude, we all are living in a fishbowl and we're all wet. And what you're saying is that you are not wet, that you don't see that you're not impacted by culture or by historical context or by American capitalism or individualism. You're just reading the Bible plainly, but you're not. That was my general point.
You said you don't want to separate, Tim, I know you asked the question, separate a child from a same-sex couple. But we take children out of houses all the time for parents who drink too much and don't send their kids to school for truancy. I'm a county commissioner. I get sheriff reports all the time of us separating children and parents for much lesser breaking of laws than adultery before God. So I would
but the wild part about that claim is that alcoholism objectively with data harms people around them, right? You actually harm children. You believe that two men having sex is adultery, despite data proving that many people do that and have flourishing lives full of love. Whether you want to believe it or not is fine. But it's just funny to hear you compare it to alcoholism as if they have the same real world consequences, when that's just not true at all.
Well, let's get back to foundations, right? You said that I think the word you...
By the way, just notice how little data they're citing. Like, there's no data here so far. Kenton has not cited any kind of study, any kind of anything. I mean, even to support his own positions. Like, maybe he can pull some arbitrary study done by some fundamentalist of why, same-sex sex is so harmful. I mean, but he doesn't, because it's just not there. It's wild.
Or the phrase you used was an objective moral framework, right?
I believe that in your sermon that I listened to that you gave me, you use that language.
Okay, so is there an objective moral framework?
In what way?
Is there such thing as objective morality?
It depends. Is lying always wrong?
No.
Okay. Is stealing always wrong?
No.
Okay. I mean, I just gave you two things that there's no objective truth about.
Are there specific parameters that make lying and stealing not wrong?
For sure, right? But and what do we do?
Are those parameters objective?
It depends. It's different societies to see it differently. The reason why we have a court system that's so robust is to take things case by case.
Does morality define on the society that defines it, or does morality depend on God?
Well,
I think in America, actually, no, globally, every society has different standards for different things. And there are general ideas. Killing someone is usually by most societies seen as wrong, but there are always exceptions, right? Did you kill the person in self-defense? Did you kill the person because they were trying to harm you or someone else? That depends. I mean, some people today, for example, are celebrating.
Are those societies objectively amoral?
What I'm trying to get at is, for example, who is the guy who just got acquitted today for putting the guy in a sleeper hold?
Jordan Neely.
Yeah, Neely. He killed that guy, and the jury said, you're acquitted. Was he objectively wrong for doing that?
First of all, I don't think he actually killed the guy.
Well, he put him in. Okay.
Second of all, the man was posing a danger to all the people on that train. So
he does. Okay.
Well, I would just say very quickly too, we probably need to be careful about throwing around killing versus murder. Those are two different things. Even our court systems recognize the difference between killing and murder, one being premeditated, one taking a life. They're two different things. And the 10 Commandments, that Hebrew word there is murder. It's not kill. Thou shalt not murder. I don't know if I'll just throw that out there. That maybe that's another.
By the way, one thing I should have done in this part of the conversation, which I did kind of feel not that great on, was objective just means something that exists outside of our heads. And yes, I do believe that there is objective truth out there and even objective morality. There are moral things that exist outside of our heads, for sure. What Kenton is trying to do, I think, is to do the kind of the classic apologist perspective of like, well, you're probably just a radical modernist or postmodernist who doesn't think that truth exists at all. And my point is saying, if it does exist, which by the way, I believe it does, we're still all trying to figure it out, aren't we? Because none of us seem to really agree on what moral truth looks like in many different scenarios. Of course, there are broad categories where I feel like every society throughout history would agree you shouldn't do that. But even then, it gets real dicey real quick. And so, I don't know, this kind of felt like a detour to me, to be honest. I should do better at explaining my position here and thinking through my own perspective on objective versus subjective truth. But that's where I was.
Just more stuff in the pot.
Well, yeah, we can't go down the apologetics route. I'm just trying to, we can probably stick to the thesis in general. Yeah. Is Christian nationalist good, or nationalism good for society?
Yeah. And you're saying overall, because no, it isn't. Because maybe I want to shift gears here to the New Testament. We've just spent 20 minutes in the Old Testament, and we started to get into the words of Jesus. You said something that kind of piqued my interest. You said, well, no, it goes against blessed are the meek. It goes against love your enemies. Tim, where are you seeing Christian nationalism being proposed where it wouldn't love their enemies? Because I think what we then would define is, well, what does it mean to love someone? Does it mean for them to continue in their sin or continue to be self-destructive, or does it mean that we do something else?
Yeah, well, usually loving your enemies doesn't mean throwing them in prison. Just throwing that out there.
Is throwing a criminal in prison an act of love?
It's an act of justice.
Or
I kind of walked into this one a little bit.
Justice
I should have been more clear.
Love? Is it loving to administer justice to those?
It can be for certain people, but we're not talking. The ethos of Christian nationalism is that everyone outside of its framework is an enemy of God and must be dealt with as such. Christ died for his enemies. As Jesus people, we have an obligation to love our enemies and hope that they are loved well, because that's what Christ did for us. Christ did not advocate for bearing new crosses for his enemies. He bore a cross for his enemies. So what I'm saying is Christian...
I misspoke there. What I should have said was Christ did not advocate for building new crosses for our enemies, but to bear a cross for our enemies. So that was just I misspoke.
Nationalism believes in taking over a society, ruling by force, putting people in prison for doing things that they believe are blaspheming God. That is not loving our neighbors or our enemies well at all.
So when Jesus says, go make disciples of all nations and teach them to observe all that I have commanded you, is he ruling with force there?
What does he teach them to do? Does he teach them to go take over the government inside of whatever nation they're going to and take it from the top down? No, the whole point of the Jesus movement is that it's underground. The last shall be first. It comes from the ground up. Jesus was a homeless Palestinian Jewish man under Roman occupation. He could have said, guys, we got to overthrow the government because I'm in charge here. But he didn't. He actually lets the empire crucify him. The whole mantra, the whole message of Jesus is inherently the opposite of what Christian nationalism teaches people, because Christian nationalism believes that they have the ultimate authority, not Jesus, that they have to be the ones in charge to rule on behalf of God from the top down. That is not the model that Jesus lays out for us.
This is why we need a holistic understanding of what Scripture teaches about the Son of God.
It happens every time.
How is that a shift?
Because Christian nationalism does not quote Jesus as often as they quote arbitrary laws from the Torah or something about Paul. Because I just gave you the framework that is objectively true about how the
Didn't I just quote Jesus?
What?
Didn't I just quote Jesus?
Yeah, but as
now let me finish my thought. We have to have a holistic understanding about what Scripture says about the Son of God. Why did Jesus come into the world? Psalm chapter 2 says, "You are my son, and on this day I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your inheritance." Psalm 110 says, "The Lord said unto my Lord, sit at my right hand, and I will make all of your enemies a footstool for your seat, or for your feet." Jesus, before he ascends into heaven, says, "Go and make disciples of all nations and teach them to observe all that I have commanded you." What Jesus is preaching and teaching when Jesus affirms everything that the Old Testament says is that he came to take the nations. He came to make disciples of all the nations.
No, take and make disciples are so different. And by the way, your interpretation of Psalms 110 is objectively, factually not correct. Look up the Hebrew, the Jewish interpretation of Psalm 110. That word Lord is not what you think it means.
By the way, I know this because I saw him bring up this point in a different video, so I looked it up. But yes, Psalm 110, he's essentially justifying violence from Jesus, and Psalm 110 is not talking about Jesus.
I encourage anyone to go look it up. What you're doing is you're literally picking and choosing verses throughout the Hebrew Bible, tying them back to Jesus, and then making the claim that Jesus is calling his disciples to rule by force. And as we see in the life and teachings of Jesus with his disciples, like for example, when I think Peter, whatever his disciple is, that chops off the guard's ear in defense of Jesus, what does Jesus do? He heals the ear of the guard, the person who's going to imprison him. The life and model of teaching of Jesus is very clear in the four Gospels. It's very clear for what the Christ follower is to do. It's not even a question. So again, we can argue. You can argue the theological implication, whatever you want. I'm going to argue it's a horrible interpretation. Many actual scholars who know their stuff have debunked this, and that's fine. And these outcomes do not benefit a society. They actually harm society, and especially the people inside of it who do not adhere to such a worldview.
So first of all, in a Christian nationalist framework, if a man were to chop off the ear of, say, a police officer and someone failed to render aid, and first of all, the person who committed the violence would be taken to prison, and second of all, the person ought to render aid.
That happens now. Then why do we need a Christian nationalist society if all he's saying is we're gonna keep doing the same thing? Like, mission accomplished, bro.
Giving an example of Jesus giving kindness and condemning Peter for what he did, that's not anything against Christian nationalism. What we understand is that there are specific rules and responsibilities for the state, for the civil magistrate, and there are roles and responsibilities given to individual people. And so a lot of these things that you're saying, hey, Jesus says...
That's a good point, Gary. Unless the cop was atheist or Hindu or maybe Muslim. Yeah, that's a great point. I would imagine under Kenton's view of Christian nationalism, there would be no atheist cops or no Hindu cops or Muslim cops because they're all blasphemers who hate God. I mean, this is just the absurdity of the argument. And by the way, this perspective that Kenton has does bolster the data point that the more Christian nationalist you are, the less you believe in societal or religious pluralism, which we see all the time. These people are not fans of a multicultural society, a multiracial society, a multi-ethnic society, or religious society. They really want assimilation into what would be called whiteness, although they don't see it that way. But that's exactly what they're arguing for. This stuff comes from somewhere. I did a live last year with Kevin Carnahan responding to an entire Stephen Wolfe sermon. It's 3 hours long, has almost 100,000 views. I recommend going back there to the live and watching it because it unpacks just how deeply racist so much of this Christian nationalist ethos actually is.
love your neighbor. Hey, Jesus says, what you do to the least of these, my brethren, you do unto me. All these things that you're stating are things that are roles and responsibilities of individuals and not necessarily the state. So my question
Right.
for you
So
is,
classic. So
what
classic.
is the Christian, you claim to be a Christian, what is the Christian responsibility of the state? Is it to uphold all these things that individuals are supposed to do, or is it to force individuals to arbitrarily put money in a specific pot to help, whatever organization, whatever social project?
Well, I do think it is interesting how, the teachings of Jesus are individualized and not for to be applied to maybe systems or structures or whatever, but arbitrary, what you call our moral or God's moral law should be imposed on like a systemic level. It's just interesting to me to hear you say that, but that's
Right.
fine. Yeah,
Classic.
I argue for a secular government, because secularism actually allows other views to flourish so long they're not imposing on the other. Now, that's a complicated thing. There's a reason why we have courts and governments, and we have tons of laws, and we have tons of cases, and there's nuance, and really complicated situations come up because the world is a complicated place. This is not binary. We don't live in a black and white world. That's just not how things exist. But what makes America and its Constitution so brilliant is that it intentionally does not mention that we are any kind of religious nation. It actually says that the government shouldn't be infringing on the church, and the church shouldn't be infringing on the state. And what that does is it allows people for different beliefs to make room and to have those beliefs. So, one way to think about it is your right to swing your fist stops where someone else's face begins, right? And people will often ask, well, then isn't secularism a religion? Not any more than a referee takes a side on a basketball team. No, the whole point of a secular government is that it's supposed to be, right, as much of a neutral space as possible as we reason together with our neighbors to figure out what kind of nation we want to be. What makes Christian nationalism so interesting to me is not that it argues for Christian positions, it's that it argues for positions that are exclusively Christian. So, for example, I'm much more of a progressive Christian. I believe in affordable health care based on the teachings of Jesus and also loving my neighbor, etc. But there are plenty of other people in this society who would not be a Christian who could also agree with me on why affordable healthcare could be a good thing for humanity, or for America. My atheist neighbor and I can reason on that. My Muslim neighbor and I can reason on that. We can find common ground despite having different theological beliefs. Christian nationalism wants to hold to exclusive Christian claims and enshrine them legally and culturally that everyone else must, at a minimum, acknowledge. And that, to me, is where I think we start infringing on the right to our neighbors' well-being.
So I don't think there's a single Christian nationalist who would say that affordable healthcare is a bad thing. What we would question is whose responsibility is it to administer that healthcare?
There it is.
Does the state have the ability or have the God-given right to enforce me to pay for the healthcare of the homosexual who garnered AIDS because of his illicit living?
I mean, I'm not even going to entertain that kind of question because AIDS is so much bigger than two gay people having sex. That was debunked literally in the 80s. But on a bigger note, universal healthcare or healthcare that is heavily subsidized by the government happens in many countries. And guess what? People don't go into medical debt in order to survive. Unlike in America, where 14% of Americans have serious medical debt, 1% have medical debt over $10,000, and corporations are profiting billions of dollars by denying health claims. So yeah,
now notice, don't forget, the thesis of this conversation is Christian nationalism good for society? And Kenton's argument is, why should I, as a Christian nationalist, be forced to pay into a system that would take care of my neighbors who I don't agree with? So Kenton's kind of admitting no, Christian nationalism would not be good for many in society. And he kind of proves the point, I think, without even seeing it. Dude, you literally are fighting me on the idea that healthcare that's subsidized by the government, which, by the way, it already is to some degree, shouldn't be able to help your gay neighbor because they, in his mind, contracted AIDS, which, again, is just so ridiculous. It's to put this into a different example, this is like Kenton saying, I don't believe that the police force should be socialized, which it currently is. None of us pay for police. It's paid by our taxes. And also because I don't want the police helping my queer neighbor if someone breaks into their house. It's not my responsibility to take care of my queer neighbor's break-in because I'm a Christian nationalist. Do you hear how absolutely absurd that sounds? How ridiculous that sounds? Oh, God, like this part of the conversation in my head, I'm just like, what world is this dude living in where he thinks that this is like a rational take? Have you read the parable of the Good Samaritan, Kenton? Like, you are the people, you're the person that Jesus is talking about when they ask him, who is my neighbor? And he points out the person that you hate, the person that you think is scum. And let me tell you a story when the Good Samaritan, or in this case, the queer guy, was the upright, righteous one, and the religious fanatic like yourself, Kenton, was actually the one who didn't help their neighbor. Like, wake up. Wake up. It's wild that he doesn't see it. By the way, if you're just joining, welcome. I'm Tim from the New Evangelicals. Watching myself, it's real meta. Give this video a like. That'd be so awesome. If you're new to the channel, give it a subscribe. We post a lot of content trying to do our best to critique Christian nationalism and offer people a better path forward in their faith. All super chats, all of them, go right to making this work possible. We can't do it without you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Numinix, for the $5 super chat. I really appreciate that. Here we go.
Are way more just and fair ways to administer healthcare to all of our neighbors. And that's part of being in society. Like, whether you like it or not, Kenton, you live in a society with 300 million other people. Some of them are going to have beliefs and even do things that you don't like, just like how you believe things and do things that they don't like. But to make society work, you have to have certain foundational understandings that for the common good, maybe we pool our resources together. This is why, thankfully, none of us pay for a police force out of pocket. It's covered by our taxes, despite the fact that maybe me and my neighbor down the street have serious disagreements or maybe even behaviors that I don't like. His tax dollars helps cover my costs if I ever need the cops to show up. I mean, this is just, to me, it's not that complicated.
So I'll ask the question again.
Okay.
Do we as individuals, do we have to bear the responsibility of a woman getting an abortion or the natural consequences of committing adultery? Are we beholden to pay those costs? Is that just and right for us to do?
Yes.
Is that good for society?
Absolutely, especially when it's the third trimester and something goes terribly wrong with the fetus, causing the woman to go septic. Absolutely, it is.
Well, that's not an abortion.
That is an abortion. I'm not even going to argue that with you. It is absolutely an abortion.
Here.
There have been so many studies done by this exact thing. It is absolutely classed and considered as an abortion. Look up California law on this. It absolutely is.
I think he might be making this statement as many medical doctors do, that there's no need to kill the fetus or the child to save the mother. If
that absolutely does happen at times.
No, they don't say, the mother is septic, we need to kill the child to save her. That's
delusional.
not what happens.
No, that's
they remove the child, and the child can be killed in the process.
Right. So yes, there have been cases where a woman is going through a fetal demise, where the fetus is on the way out, but still has a heartbeat, and doctors cannot go through the procedure because of heartbeat laws on the books. And the woman ends up going septic because she's literally bleeding out on the floor. There are actual stories that document this. So anyway, to answer your question,
I've seen those stories, and they're all a little shaky. But
what? They're all a little shaky. By whose objective standard, Kenton, are these shaky stories? Like, have you not? Wait, what? How? Like, what do you say to that? What you tell someone? No, there have been documented cases of women who have had something go terribly wrong during their pregnancy, and because the fetus still had a heartbeat, doctors cannot perform what would be classified as an abortion, and a woman ends up bleeding out or going septic and almost dying. And Kenton's like, yeah, I've seen those stories. They're kind of shaky. It's like, sources, proof, evidence? Like, do you think that women are just like making these stories up? Do you think that this is some manufactured propaganda campaign so people can just kill their children, as Kenton would say? Like, it is absolutely wild to me. It is wild that we are here in 2024. And it's even more wild that people like Kenton have serious political power under an incoming Trump administration. Do you think Pete Hegseth shares this view of Kenton? Absolutely. Abso-freaking-lutely. 100%. because he comes from the same world. Oh my gosh. Yeah, they were kind of shaky, those abortion stories. What? No, it's real world scenarios, bro. Like, things go wrong during pregnancies. And it turns out, I know that this is crazy. This is going to be wild for Kenton to understand. Kenton, if you're watching this, just hear me out. You know what? Let me do this. Let me go solo for a second. Come right here. Let me give you a wild idea to think about. Maybe women do not like getting third trimester abortions. I know it's wild, but maybe it's very unlikely that a pregnant person, right, is in the third trimester. The nursery is built. The crib is ready to go. They probably had the baby shower. And they go, you know, on second thought, I know we're at like week 30 something. I changed my mind. Let me just get an abortion. I just want to do this. That's just not really a thing. And that's why third trimester abortions are so incredibly rare. They're like 0.9% of all abortions, because usually something goes tragically wrong with the fetus that's still developing. And an unplanned procedure has to get done to save the life of the mother. And it's tragic, and they mourn the loss. But in Kenton's worldview, these women just want to murder their children. They're just so totally depraved. They want to murder their kids. What a delusion. Like, what a delusional world to live in to really think that. It's unbelievable. Okay. Where was I? Back to this video. Thanks for being here, friends. Let's keep going.
While we're on the subject of abortion, my question is it good for society to kill several million children over the course of 50 years?
Yeah, so a couple things on this. First off, of course, we all know, hopefully by now, that 97% of abortions happen before the first trimester. So let's just get that out of the way.
What does that matter?
It absolutely matters. Because,
how does that... Well, does the child have more value in the first trimester than...
I know that this might sound shocking to some people, but, you know, when a fetus meets an egg and starts to multiply, that's not the same thing as a sentient toddler. Like, they're very different things. Just like how when you go to make a cake, the batter before it goes in the oven isn't a cake yet. Things have to actually happen chemically. Same kind of process. But despite all that,
I understand that. But is
point.
that...
I will concede
Bill
your
Burr's
point.
that would disagree with you there.
Let me concede your point, just for sake of argument. The way you do this, the way you actually lower abortion rates, man, again, this is where data matters. When Texas implemented, for example, their draconian abortion rates, abortion bans, not only did infant mortality go up per 100,000, and abortion rates go up, more women died as a result. The data is absolutely clear on this, that the way you lower abortion rates is by access to contraceptive, affordable health care, livable wages, okay, and doing things that promote family values, which, by the way, Kenton, I'm sure you and I would agree with. I want children to grow up in a loving and stable home where two people aren't forced to work for an unlivable wage in debt up to their eyeballs, where they're leaving time away from their kids. So yes, there are absolutely ways to minimize what I might call as an unnecessary abortion. And
oh, it's RC. He's my favorite troll. Yeah. Hi, RC. Am I still a bad father to you?
So there are ways to do that. And the way you do that is not by doing a blanket draconian abortion ban that also, in some cases for Christian nationalists like Jeff Durbin, believes that killing the woman as well is the just thing to do. So that's just data.
Think that do you believe in the death penalty for any reason?
No.
So really quick about this with the abortion, I really wanted to sidestep the whole debate that they want to drag you into, which is that you're killing children, like it's a modern day Holocaust. That's a whole different discussion for a different time. I was trying to really find the common ground of like, hey, let's just say for sake of argument, I agree with you. How do we actually lower abortion rates? And then I wanted to argue on the premise of, it turns out draconian abortion bans don't actually do what you think that they're going to do. And we know that from data, access to contraceptives, sex education, livable wages, all lower abortion rates. I mean, you can look through the past 20 years and look at from Bush all the way down to Obama and so on, how they have dropped. So it is, I tried to get to that angle of like, hey man, I mean, really, you should put this back on the Christian Nationalists. If you really believe that a modern day Holocaust, which I think is just such an unfair comparison for so many reasons, but if you think that's happening, wouldn't you be as pragmatic as possible to try and stop that? Why aren't you? Okay, really quick, I need to talk about this. This was what I was hoping was going to happen, and I appreciate your honesty. So the right corner has really shown his colors here. We've been in some DM arguments, and he really has unpacked himself as a very dehumanizing person that really I don't take seriously. And this comment here, I think, shows the anti-Semitism that actually exists in Christian nationalist spaces. RC claims to be a Christian nationalist. He doesn't like me because I wasn't baited into debating him. And so now I'm a Jew masquerading as a Christian to pervert the real message of Christianity. So I actually really appreciate you coming on, RC, to demonstrate that when I tell people that Christian nationalists are inherently anti-Semitic and that they actually don't like Jewish people, you can come on and you can absolutely do this. So I appreciate that. Thank you for proving the point. Hope you have a great day. And now I'm going to ban you because there's no reason for you to be here anymore. Let's resume, my friends. Let's resume. It is unbelievable. All right, here we go.
Not.
Because I'm a Christian.
Can you cite why your Christian beliefs would oppose the death penalty?
Yes, because Jesus teaches us to love our enemies. I don't think killing stops killing. I don't think violence stops violence. I mean, I don't think more fire stops fire. It's the same logic here.
That gets back to the question I asked earlier: is applying consequences to murder, is that loving?
Well, consequences are different than murdering someone else. And by the way, studies do show that I'm blanking on the term. Forgive me. Not retributive justice, but
restorative justice.
Whatever. There's a different frame of justice. Someone will put it in the comments. But yeah, there are other ways to punish, so to speak, or even to teach people who kill others lessons without having to murder them.
But that's not what God prescribes. What God prescribes is He says that the state of the nation does not bear the sword in vain, right? So the Christian position. The objective Christian position is that the death penalty is good and
not
right.
objective. It's heavily debated throughout Christian history.
Especially for murderers. And so
guys, Jesus says don't repay evil for evil, but the objective Christian position is that you should support the death penalty because Romans 13. Come on, dude. Come on. I honestly at this point started almost feeling bad that like Kenton wanted to debate me here because he's just, and not that, listen, I'm not an expert. If you watch any of our content, we have experts on, okay? I'm not claiming to be some pro at this, but even by my uneducated ass, this guy was way out of his depth here, clearly.
A mother kills her child who is made in the image of God. The biblical prescription is that mother should also be.
First off, that's not even true. You do know that in Exodus 21, it actually distinguishes between the fetus inside the womb and the fetus outside the womb as far as consequences, right? Like you're aware, you're aware that that's an actual passage in Scripture that we can go through right now. Like the Bible.
Let's go there.
Yeah, sure. I'll have no problem doing that.
While you guys are doing that, let me just put this out because we've got about 10 minutes left here of conversation, and I just want to tell people in the chat it's very active in there.
I'm going to fast forward a little bit here.
Actually lower abortion rates, but there is no serious injury.
I get into Exodus 22. Nothing really comes of it. We'll just kind of keep
offender
going.
Must be fine whatever the woman's husband demands on the actual point. But I just wanted to be clear to Kenton that I'm willing to even concede his point and give you actual tools and prescriptions to actually lower abortion rates. And I don't know why so-called pro-lifers don't want to incorporate them. Because in my mind, if I really thought that children are being murdered every single day, I'd be as pragmatic as humanly possible to minimize every single one. And given that we know that in fact, abortion rates actually rose after Trump did the Roe v. Wade overturn, that doesn't seem like a very practical, way to lower what you would probably call as a mass genocide of a people group.
So what I'm gathering is that you do think that lowering abortion rates or minimizing the number of abortions that take place in this country is a good thing, right? It's good.
Oh
for
yeah,
society.
I don't want more abortions.
Why?
Of course not. Why what?
Why is it good to limit the number of abortions? Would it be a good thing if there were 0 elective abortions that took place?
It'd be a great thing if people were actually able to choose when they wanted to get pregnant or not.
I agree.
Great. So how do we do that, Kenton? How do we do that? Maybe instead of punishing the top of the dandelion, we go to the root and we solve the root and we give people access to contraceptives and sexual education so they know how a penis and the vagina work and how this is a real thing. I mean, Kenton, you and I grew up in purity culture.
How about
I'm
this?
sure. Did you
How about
know?
this? We both believe that God created the universe.
Sure.
Okay.
Do you agree that what God created was very good?
Sure.
If God created the universe that he created is very good, then the way that he has ordered the universe belongs to him. We should obey his law and his understanding on these things. The way that
Back
we
to the law
control
thing. Like,
or
geez,
limit
what
and,
law?
and give people the choice.
He's never answered that question. When you say law, what do you mean? Frankly, I will tell you guys, there have been people who have fleshed this out as Christian nationalists. You can read R.J. Rushdoony. He has volumes on this. But Kenton can't answer that question. Ugh.
Of when they want to get pregnant is that we follow God's laws and God's directions in regards to sexuality.
Oh my goodness. And your fatal flaw is that if you're using the Bible,
saying, "Thou shalt not commit adultery."
It's just I agree with you up until you get to the God's law part, because if you're using the Bible, especially the English Protestant Bible, as the foundation for that, you're on a slippery slope. I mean, okay, one example. Let me ask you a question. And this is not a trick question. I want to make sure that I'm understanding. Would you say that Adam and Eve were the first two people that we all have descended from at some point in history?
Yes.
Okay. So obviously then, just by nature of logic, Adam and Eve and their kids at some point had to start having incestuous relationships with each other, right?
Yes, and that's why.
Okay, and so what I'm trying to understand is like what part of God's clear sexual ethic are we talking about here? Lamech takes 2 wives in Genesis 4. God, while speaking on behalf of the prophet Nathan, says to David, "Did I not give you your previous king's wives, all 8 of them?" What clear sexual ethic are we talking about? Especially when you consider that in the Hebrew and Greek, there is no word for husband or wife. It is always man or woman. And the language is a man takes a woman and claims her. It's only adultery if the woman sleeps with another man, not if a man sleeps with another woman in the Hebrew Bible, at least. That's the whole point. So I don't know what kind of clear sexual ethic you're talking about. Like, just read through the Hebrew Bible.
This is the fatal flaw. The Bible's clear. Just read the Bible. I mean, how many of you were taught the Bible stands for basic instructions before leaving Earth? Then you read it and you're like, there's a lot of really crazy stuff in here. Oh, well, those parts, context, and it's not what you think. And yes, I mean, we obviously all descended from Adam and Eve, and God's sexual ethic is super clear. And also, yes, maybe the kids were sleeping together, but that's because sin didn't take full root yet. Like, wait, what? Where's the consistency? Like, you would think, Kenton, that if God ordained this so-called clear sexual ethic of one man and one woman for life in a covenantal marriage, which, by the way, isn't even referenced in Genesis 1 or 2, but I digress. You would think it'd be kind of twisted for that God to be like, well, Adam and Eve, you're the only humans here, so I guess you and the kids got to start getting it on because, well, I'll make it, it's one generation into my ideal setup, but I designed it so you have to have kids sleeping with kids. I mean, that's where we get to. The Bible's clear. Come on. I'm a Christian. I love the Bible.
All over the place.
Yeah. Again, I would submit to the clear sexual ethic that Jesus states. A man shall leave his father and mother. He shall cleave to his wife, and they two shall become one flesh. That is God's design for sexuality. That is what he has prescribed. That is what he commanded both in Genesis chapter 2, and that's what Jesus commanded in, I believe it's Matthew chapter 19.
Okay, so we get rid of everything else. We ignore everything else in the Bible, and we go to those 2 passages, and that's our proof text for the foundational belief.
That's what Jesus claims as a biblical sexual ethic. Yes, that's what
now we go to
defines
Jesus.
Marriage as.
I'm just trying to keep track of like when we're in the Hebrew Bible, when the 10 Commandments apply, like that's supposed to be a thing. But then Jesus.
Well, my
says,
position
Genesis
would be
2,
that Jesus, as the Son of God and the author of all of Scripture, is the one who can perfectly interpret Scripture, and so we should fall upon his interpretation.
Okay, so we should then love our enemies. We should
absolutely.
We should then celebrate that blessed are the meek and not the powerful. That the first shall be last, and last shall be first. So
was Jesus meek?
Yeah.
Was Jesus powerful? Is Jesus powerful? Does Jesus have all authority on earth?
I know that you probably are seeing what I'm seeing here, but like it is whiplash. It is freaking whiplash. We're here, we're there, we're taking this passage, this matters. This is the clear sexual ethic. Jesus was meek, wasn't he? But he was also all powerful. So it's like, what are we talking about, dude? And here's the thing: I'm trying to use the evangelical framework to make sense of this. Like, I'm not even like a biblical critical scholar. I'm just a dude who was shaped by evangelicalism, using those tools to find the consistent logic of how Kenton interprets the Bible. And I can't see it. And I'm trying, but I can't see it.
Yes. Do you have authority on earth, Kenton?
No, but I exercise the authority of Christ. I go therefore in his authority.
And there it is.
And
that's
attempt
the
to
link.
disciple my nation.
That's the link, my friend. You think, and this is my whole point, Christian nationalism believes they have a mandate by God to take over the nation because you think that you have the power that Christ has given you. So yes, Jesus has all power. You do not.
When Jesus says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, what does he mean by go therefore? Go therefore what? Go because of his authority, right?
No, go and preach the good news that there's a new kingdom that is the upside down kingdom where
what
the
does it
first
mean to
are
disciple
last
the
and
nations?
It means to teach them the ways of Jesus. So blessed are the meek, blessed first are last, blessed are the poor in spirit. This is the gospel, my friend.
We can do it, Kenton. We can do it.
I don't know how else to say it. Like, we can read through the whole Sermon on the Mount and go through it line by line, and we can talk about, does Christian nationalism embody this or does it not? And we can just go all the way down the list. It doesn't. It doesn't care about its neighbors. It doesn't care about them. It cares about ruling and taking control and being in charge.
Why are ruling, control, and charge objectively bad things?
I didn't say that they were. They're not always bad things. I'm glad that I'm in charge of my kids when they're going crazy. But we're talking about other human beings who have different belief systems than you.
When we
like
broaden that horizon,
Kenton,
and we have a society that has fundamentally refused God's law, the law of the Creator,
oh my gosh,
and abandoned what He has commanded. Why is it good for society to disobey what God has done, what God has commanded?
I want to be clear that
come on,
very clear.
Yeah, but hang in there. You can take more. I promise. You're with me. We're doing this together. Look, I do these lives because I don't want to watch this alone. I don't want to watch it alone. And so when I see 280 people watching this with me, it makes me happy. I feel not alone. So do it for me. Do it for me. Come on, we can do this.
If the 10 Commandments are God's law, as you said earlier, I think our society has 8 out of 10 enshrined somewhere in law. You can't steal in America. You can't do a lot of things. You can maybe have adulterous affairs, but even then, there's still consequences for your actions. So I'm just saying, let's not make it seem like somehow America and these 10 Commandments have absolutely no overlap. There are definitely laws on the books that protect several of what the 10 Commandments says. Despite all of that, though, let me ask you a question. If you were listening right now to a Muslim speak and they said, listen, Sharia law is ordained by Allah. Like, we don't care what you have to say, Kenton. Our God has given us all power and authority to disciple the nations and to proselytize to you. And honestly, until you repent and convert to Islam, we're going to keep coming for you. Would you really take them seriously? Would you accept that as an acceptable way to live underneath the nation of America?
Tim, as a Christian, or as a Christian, is the Islamic God, is Allah the true God?
Kenton, this is my exact point.
This is my exact
point. It is literally
Did Allah create the universe?
It is the Spider-Man meme, my friend. That's what's going on here. You have taken by the way, it might be very clear, a very particular set of Christian framework. Like, your framework comes from American fundamentalism more than the historic Christian tradition in so many ways, but whatever. You've taken that and you've said, I'm standing on some kind of objective framework of how I interpret the Bible. And now everyone else in America, despite their objections, should be completely overridden because I have the truth that no one else has.
You didn't answer the question. Did Allah create the universe? Does the universe belong to Allah?
It belongs to God, whoever God is.
Is God described in the Christian Bible, or is he described in the Quran?
Well, God can be described in many ways, my friend. God is bigger than God. God precedes when the Bible was written, right? Like, we're aware of that.
I am aware, but the Bible is the Word of God.
No, I would not agree with that for many reasons.
So that you
Triggered!
are rejecting the premise that Scripture itself puts forward. That
No,
it is the
no, I'm
express breathed
rejecting
out
your
word of God.
interpretation of a fundamentalist view of the Scriptures. That's a very different thing.
What I see happening over and over again is that you're taking what is taught in Scripture, you're taking clear biblical commands like go and disciple the nations and teach them to observe all that I've commanded you. Like Scripture is that which is breathed out by God. Like do not commit adultery, do not murder. And you are saying, no, that's your interpretation.
That's
and
not
you
true.
are putting yourself above God's commandment, and you are allowing yourself to define what is moral, what is good,
No, that's
instead of relying on the
Kenton,
definitions of the God of the universe.
We all do this. The same reason why you gave me an argument why fabrics of a mixed nature are fine. You do the same thing. You just don't see it. You're also interpreting Scripture through a particular lens. You have a framework, a hermeneutic. Now, you believe it's the right one, but I have shocking news for you. I mean, it's all due respect. You're a small, tiny sliver on the edge of 2,000 years of Christian tradition, Eastern Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant denominations. So you don't have the corner on this stuff, man. You just don't. There's 2,000 years of writings of legit theologians, even Augustine, who believed that the 7-day creation narrative was allegory, not a literal thing. There's plenty of people who disagree with you, and you don't have the objective truth to say or right to say, sorry, guys, they're all wrong. I'm all right. Now submit to me and my interpretation of this stuff. That's just a reality, dude. Even your claim about all Scripture being God breathed, you know that the Bible was not formed when that was written. I know you know that. You know that the New Testament was not canonized when that was written.
Well, I mean, if we're going to talk about canonicity, the New Testament was already breathed out by God before the church recognized it, right?
What? No, what? No, the church fights over this. Eastern Orthodox have different books in their Bibles in the Catholic tradition. Like, this is what we do, man. We fight about
I'm aware, but if God wrote a book...
Guys, my brain. Oh, look, I know it's a long live. We're almost there, but just take a breath, okay? I really... Look, if you got to sign off, if you got to go, you got to go. I'm not here to clickbait you or rage bait you into watching this with me. But man, I mean, this is just like my head. And okay, well, can I be real with you for a second? I think that I have empathy for Kenton because I grew up like him in many ways. I don't think I was that right wing or that fundamentalist, but I certainly was part of churches without knowing it that were King James only. There's a small church in my town that I grew up in that was a KJV only church. I mean, I definitely was adjacent in some ways, and I just thought that's how it worked. Like, I thought this made sense. It wasn't until I started really asking serious questions and not being super happy with the answers I was given that made me kind of expand beyond, right? I mean, one of the books that I read, do I have it here? It's somewhere here on my desk. My desk is such a shit show, to be honest with you. But I have a book here called, like, The 5 Views of Inerrancy. All these different scholars, including Pete Enns, Al Mohler, Michael Bird, reading those books really got me to think differently about what the Bible actually is versus what it isn't. And watching Kenton just really regurgitate fundamentalist talking points is wild to me. No, Alden, we're still here. Okay, we still have a ways to go. So don't worry. Not a ways. We got about 25 minutes or so. But I feel for him. I really do. It's hard watching it on this side of things now, right? Look, I used to believe a literal 7-day creation. I used to read the books. I read, theologies by MacArthur. I listened to Paul Washer sermons. I thought that the Bible was just God's clear word to us. But again, like, I had to follow my instinct. Like, wait, when was the Bible formed, and how did God talk to people before that? So I'm just saying, look, we have a pretty strict policy here at TNE. We don't dehumanize. I'm not here to dehumanize Kenton. I'm not even here to mock him. That isn't my point at all. My point is just to say that I relate a lot to where Kenton is, and I'm glad that I kind of moved beyond it. I really am. So there's that. Nathan asked a question, do I believe in the virgin birth? Honestly, I affirm the virgin birth for sure. Do I know it happened, like, objectively? No, I don't know that. In fact, I did a really good interview with my friend Tripp Fuller on this a couple of years ago. That's worth checking out. But anyway, that's for a different discussion. So I'm just here to say that, like, I'm with you guys. I know it's frustrating. I'm glad you're watching it with me. I feel a lot better. It just makes it more engaging. Again, if you're enjoying the video, please give it a like. please feel free to give this video a share, subscribe to the channel if you're new here. If you want to do a super chat, that'd be so helpful. All super chats go to supporting this work, etc. Let's just kind of keep going. I mean, there's a little bit more to get through, and the most shocking part, this is not rage bait. I mean, this is true. The most shocking part is yet to come. It's yet to come. So,
book, then he only wrote one, right?
Well,
There's
I
only
don't think
one
God wrote
correct.
a book. Humans wrote the Bible. We believe that they were inspired by God. That's a very different thing than saying God wrote the Bible. And again, you're ignoring the very long, proven tradition of how we have our modern day Bibles. Like, it's a long story. It's not.
I am aware that's a story I've spent a lot of time studying out.
Oh, have
but yes, but that's not the subject of this discussion.
Sure, I can
and
move
so
on. No problem.
All right, so
don't think
let's wrap this up a little bit here because we are just a little bit over an hour in, and I think we're getting into some. I knew it would go into some places where we probably hadn't planned anyway. But
by the way, I'm loving this, Kenton. Hope you're cool, man. I know I'm a little intense, but
yeah,
I really am
absolutely.
enjoying the discussion. I'll talk to you
It's
anytime offline as well.
That part's completely true. I don't take this personal. I know I get kind of like passionate, but I really am enjoying the discussion, like for a lot of reasons. And I appreciate Kenton. Look, I mean, props to him. He has really good composure. He's saying what he believes. He's not apologizing for it. Props.
I actually, that idea that you had about talking about deconstruction, I thought that was interesting.
Would love to.
Yeah,
That would
so
be great.
I wanted to get to a few questions here,
Would love
if you
that.
guys don't mind, because I have some for Kenton, I have some for Tim. The first one that I thought was interesting, and I'm going to cherry pick these because I kind of have the same question, said, Tim, do you believe we live in a secular nation currently? You said that you would prefer a secular nation. Do you think we're a Christian nation, a secular nation? What would your secular nation look like?
Well, I mean, we're ruled by a secular constitution. There's no mention of God, the Bible, the Christian God in particular, especially. Now, that being said, I mean,
Well, I would say endowed from our creator has some type of deity to it.
yeah,
when you're
but not
To
talking
be
about-
fair,
yeah,
that's
but that's the Declaration of Independence.
Declaration of
to be
Independence.
Sure.
It's not the
clear.
Constitution.
Yeah,
But
Kenton!
by the way, I would say
Oh,
is that
yeah,
the
sorry.
framework that the founders wrote the Constitution was a fundamentally Christian framework.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a lot.
I understand that argument. I would just cite many books that by actual historians who disprove that, but that's fine. What I would say is that our
And I would
Constitution.
cite other ones from different historians that disagree with your historian. So
Well, I guess it's not objective then. I guess it's just a matter of opinion. So, yeah,
one
I
is
mean,
right and one is wrong.
Hold on there, Ken. Let's
Yes.
get Tim
Yes,
to
Kenton.
answer the question there. He was starting to answer what is, are we in a secular nation? And then also what would your perfect nation look like?
well, I believe that I'll be as succinct as possible. I mean, on paper, yes, we're a secular nation. Our constitution is secular. That just is what it is. But it's very evident that Christians have an immense amount of privilege here. I mean, their rights are oftentimes protected more than others who are religious differently. American Christians enjoy an entire ecosystem of social media channels, church networks, music networks, movie networks that are all completely enhanced by the culture. So, I mean, it's pretty clear to me. I mean, by the way, there are Supreme Court cases that we can document too of the Supreme Court routinely deciding in favor of religious freedom for mostly conservative Christians. They're the ones who are usually bringing these cases to court. That being said, as far as my most ideal nation, I mean, it's a big question. I would love to be in a nation where my neighbor could work a full-time job and not worry about going into debt. I would love a nation where people can get access to education that is affordable and doesn't put them in predatory loans, which I hope Kent and I would both agree that usury and the exploitation of ridiculous interest charges are unethical for anyone. I would love a society where people felt like they had what they needed and were able to spend time with their families and their kids and not be completely sold out to a corporate, post-capital or late-stage capitalistic nightmare where people are working over and over just to get their health care taken care of. So I have a lot of things I love to see done in a country that, again, where all of its citizens were promoted or were flourishing and their needs were met.
And kind of same question to you, Kenton. Do you believe we are in a Christian nation or a secular one? I would assume from your argumentation tonight, you would prefer a Christian nation, but when you look at the founding of the nation, what do you see there?
Really quick, I just want to point out that there's still nothing that Kenton has given me this entire debate that would show why Christian nationalism is a benefit for society. Like he has not given me, like, hey, if we were a Christian nationalist nation, there would be no poor people among us. We would redistribute the wealth, like the Bible tells us to do. We would have no student loans because education should be affordable. Like, there's none of that. He's not giving me any examples of what it would look like that under a Christian nationalist society that would benefit society.
So I would argue, or I would claim that at the founding of this nation, we were founded as a Christian nation, but that we have since shedded that label, that we have abandoned God, and I would argue that we're under his judgment now. So we were a Christian nation. We are no longer.
Can I ask a question
Okay,
about that follow-up? Is
sure,
that
go
possible?
ahead. Yeah.
Could you give me back then what made America a Christian nation? Was it when we had race-based chattel slavery? Was it when we had Jim Crow laws? And then what was the moment or time in American history where we ceased to be Christian? And what was the reason for that? He's walking into it.
So I think it's interesting how you take the what is perceived as the worst parts of our history and you impose that on the entire thing.
Perceived. Oh my! Buckle up, friends. Buckle up for this.
Say that every, or almost every, founder of this nation subscribed to Christian beliefs. King George even called the American Revolution one time the Presbyterian Revolution. So there is a fundamental Christian founding in this nation because the ones who founded it operated on a fundamentally Christian worldview. And then I would say when we shedded that would be it begins around World War II, and I think it's fully gone by the turn of the century.
Can a Christian nation have can a Christian nation be a place where slavery is legalized and promoted?
What do you mean promoted?
Well, like, slavery was part of like the ecosystem that made the whole thing work for a long, long time. So can a Christian nation be a place where slavery is endorsed and promoted as like the thing to be doing to keep the economy going, as it was in the early South?
There would have to be a lot of further definition of what slavery is, but yes.
Okay. And just last follow-up question, I'll stop. Can a Christian nation be a place where LGBTQ people are allowed to live and flourish?
I will say.
And practice,
No.
Okay. Thank you.
No, the answer is no.
Oh my God.
They wouldn't be criminally penalized necessarily, but I do think there is sufficient biblical warrant for homosexuals to be severely punished for their disordered actions. And my personal position would be I would love to see a nation where they go back in the closet where they belong.
Thank you. I appreciate Kenton being bluntly honest about how he really feels. But when we tell you that many people who are Christian nationalists have no problem or very few problems with slavery, but don't think that gay people should be allowed to flourish in society, I'm not exaggerating. Now, people are going to critique me. Well, this is just one example. Just watch what Joel Webben says. Watch what Stephen Wolfe says and who they hang out with. This is a very real position held by many Christian nationalists. When he said this, my jaw, it was aghast. It was agape. It was just like, wow, dude. So to be clear, for Kenton, he believes that if he was in charge, he would have the ability he would be allowed to use the power of the state to punish gay people just for being gay, or queer people just for being queer. And he would also be open to regulating slavery, as we used to do in this country. And he even called it earlier a perceived problem, right? He said, well, one of the great perceived ills. He never actually answered the question of when America stopped becoming a Christian nation. He wasn't very specific, and what elements made it that way. Do you understand why so many of us have walked away from white evangelicalism? This guy's a white evangelical. And books by people like Doug Wilson have been written in the 90s and early 2000s that have pretty much endorsed such a view. I mean, Doug Wilson, in a blog post, he's another prolific pastor in this space, has said that, quote, homosexuality is much worse than slavery, morally speaking. What the hell do you do with that? Besides fight this shit like hell. Again, does that... I should have asked Kenton here. Kenton, can you explain to me how enslaving other people and punishing queer people benefits society? Can you tell me how it benefits those people in society? Unreal. Let's keep going.
So I have a question from Sherry J here for Kenton, and this is going back a little bit. She said, cite the source, Kenton, if objective Christian view on the death penalty. So I think she was referring to when you said you believe the Bible does support the death penalty. She's looking for
we'll skip this part. Not really anything here.
That's where he's at, Sherry. All right, so let's wrap this up. I know we're getting close to
15 minutes.
He said, well, I mean, I'm trying to look. Okay, question.
I have a question. I have more questions for Kenton too. So it's
go ahead. Then let's do that.
Good. I mean, if we're going to go along with the death penalty thing, and I think you and I would actually agree strongly on this point, probably. For sake of argument, let's say, okay, death penalty is in America, which it is. I'm assuming that you support it for people who, I'm going to use very broad language to avoid censorship on YouTube, but child abuse, if you get my drift, right?
Yes.
What is your take for those kinds of people?
What do you mean? What's my take?
Like if someone gets
support
found,
the death penalty for them?
Yeah,
kill them.
So, and this is a real question. I mean, what do you think about all the church abuse cases, including ones by like Doug Wilson, who married off Steven Sittler, a known child abuser, to a woman who then later on abused his own infant? Should those people also be put in prison under Christian nationalism, even though they would profess Christian nationalist ideals?
I'm not familiar with that specific situation.
Of course you're not, Kenton. Of course you're not.
Like I said earlier, I'm from an independent fundamental Baptist background, and they have had their issues in the past. And my consistent answer in every case of that I found reasonable and verifiable evidence that there was wrongdoing on the side of the pastor, youth leader, whatever, is
cool.
Kill him.
Changing gears really quick. I had one more thought I forgot to get to. And then I'll wrap it up here on my end. You know, in 1 Corinthians 5, Paul is talking to the church. He makes it pretty clear that we have an obligation to really critique the church and not the world, because it is God's business to judge the world, especially the sexually immoral. So I'm just kind of curious, like, you know, and it actually makes sense when you think about it. All the letters that Paul is writing is really to the church, not to the world. Why do you feel the need so much to really control things outside of what the church's responsibility is, including the lives of other people who would hold to no such belief that you have and really just want to be left alone? They don't care what you do in your church. They don't care how you raise your kids, how you educate them, what you believe. They just want to be left alone, able to live their life how they want in peace and quiet. Why do you feel the need to barge into their bedrooms or whatever else it might be and say, sorry, you know, I believe that God has told me that I have the authority to throw you in prison or penalize you for, you know, having sex with your partner who's also a member of the same sex? When 1 Corinthians 5, Paul's pretty clear that we have an obligation to hold those accountable inside the church and to leave those outside in the world alone. So just some context here. I asked this question because even before I deconstructed and rethought things deeply, I had this perspective. Like, I don't get it, guys. If the Bible is clear, if the Bible is authoritative, and Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 5, essentially what he's saying is, don't worry about the world and what they do. That's God's job. Judge those inside the church. Why is the evangelical machine so focused on the world? And so this was a great place to bring this up, because Kenton's whole worldview operates on conquest and conquering and taking over secular spaces for the kingdom. But Paul tells us pretty explicitly, hey, don't do that. Just take care of your own. Let's hear his response.
Because I have an actual theology of God's judgment and blessing upon a nation. I believe that when a nation obeys God's word, they are blessed, and when they disobey God's word in large, they are cursed. I believe that if a nation does not adhere to what has been revealed in Scripture, that it poses serious and damning danger to that nation. If we do not promote a biblical understanding of society within a nation, if we do not punish those who God has commanded us to punish, if we do not uphold those God has commanded us to uphold, then there will be severe and serious judgment.
So do you disagree with Paul then on what he says here?
I would have to look into that passage and
Of
see
course
what
you
specifically
would.
I
you're
can read it right
talking
here.
about.
First Corinthians 5, 9 through 12. I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people, not at all meaning the people of this world who are immoral or the greedy and the swindlers or idolaters. In that case, you would have to leave this world. But now I am writing to you that you must not associate with anyone that claims to be a brother or sister, but is sexually immoral or greedy, an idolater or slanderer, a drunkard or a swindler. Do not even eat with such a people. What business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside. Expel the wicked person from among you.
So when he says expel the wicked person from among you, how do you know which person is wicked? Do you have to make a judgment on that?
Well, in this context, he's talking about sexual immorality, where he says that, again, what business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? So the context is look at who's inside your church doing these things and get them out. But it's God's business to judge the world outside of it.
Yeah, and again, like I said, I have a legitimate theology of God's judgment upon a nation. God does judge evildoers outside of the church. And again, what he's saying here is within the context of church, don't cast judgment on people outside of it, but in the context of church discipline, if you find an evil person within, expel them, right?
Yeah, but he also says...
So I don't see an issue with this when it comes to Christian nationalism. This is talking about in church politics. Paul will go on in 1 Corinthians 6 to talk about
it's uncanny
disputes within the church between brothers and how they ought not go to civil authorities for that, but that they should deal with it within the church as brethren. This doesn't have any bearing on public policy or the theology of the civil magistrate.
Well, don't worry, guys. Kenton's just reading the text plainly. He's not interpreting anything. The Bible is clear.
Obviously, not really any of this does, because the Ten Commandments were written to the people of Israel, not to the entire world in that context. The Levitical law was written to the people of Israel, the nation of Israel at the time. The teachings of Jesus are applicable to the followers of Jesus, and Paul was pretty clear here that those inside the church have an obligation to hold those inside the church accountable and not worry about whatever the world's doing. But it seems like because you have a few verses that you believe, teach that Christ will rule the nations one day, that somehow gives you the permission structure to now start judging nations now based on that belief system, even though you're not Christ. So I'm just trying to understand, I don't see what you're seeing, A, in the New Testament when it comes to how we judge nations, and B, in the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, as it should be called, given the context of those passages as well.
Yeah.
Again, I just don't think this passage is the slam dunk that you think it is. I think this is talking about a very particular...
Totally fair.
Can we just I mean, his whole point is that, 1 Corinthians 5 doesn't apply because it's not talking about civil law like the Hebrew Bible or like the Levitical law is. And my point is that, dude, the entire Bible isn't speaking about America at all. Like, it's all written to different cultural contexts, different people groups. And his response to that is, yeah, I just don't see it. It's like, how do you not see that you are picking and choosing what seems like are arbitrary mechanisms that give you like certain verses that, no, this is for today, this isn't, this is for America, this isn't, this is for an individual's command to love their neighbor, but this is for a society to institute. Like, literally, there is nothing consistent here. And one thing that drives me crazy as a person, and I try to listen, we all have fallacies, we all have our biases. I'm one of them, right? But I try to be somewhat consistent. I try to be. And I try to be able to give someone a consistent argument for why I believe what I believe. Watching Kenton, I mean, this guy is like, he's like a little sailboat in a storm. And he is just all over the place. Nothing makes sense. Nothing.
Okay, understandable.
And Tim, I have a question for you. So you're not advocating for a country that is lawless, though, right? I mean, you do recognize, hey, look, there needs to be criminal charges for, first-degree murder, theft.
For sure,
right?
Yes, of course.
Right, sure, crony capitalism, all these things.
Yeah.
Wild
to watch.
So do you and Kenton agree, though, that moral law that directs our laws that we have on the books right now, let's say, for the United States of America, do you believe that is based in God's moral law, which is based in at least the 10 commandments? We don't have to get back. Let's not get back into Exodus and Deuteronomy. Would you agree with that, or do you say this is subjective? Because I know we had some subjective morality talk come up earlier, and I kind of that pricked my ear, and I kind of wanted to go back to that.
Well,
what are your thoughts on that?
My understanding is that as far as the foundation of the U.S. goes, and those systems and laws and constitutional republic comes more from English common law than it does the 10 Commandments. I mean, there aren't Sabbath laws on the books, for example. There aren't adultery laws on the books. It's not in our Constitution anyway. So, I mean, sure, I guess you can argue that if you want, but I think that we're really looking at something that comes from Europe and really old English common law, and then it gets derived and kind of built out of that. I'm not saying that many of the framers weren't deists. In Thomas Jefferson's case, he ripped out parts of the Bible that he thought, were too miraculous. So certainly maybe they had some kind of belief, and maybe some were even Christian, but I don't think that they were Christian how we think about it today, considering that fundamentalism, as Kenton understands and believes it, wasn't even a framework yet. But I think we're looking more at English common law from what I understand.
Okay, so I mean, even going back farther, I'm talking about the transcendent understanding between all humankind that harming someone else for personal gain, probably not the best. Not getting into the moral landscape with atheism and things like that. I'm saying, do you believe that there is a transcendent law from a moral lawgiver in general, or do you think morals are subjective?
Well, I definitely think that there is objective morals, meaning there are things that exist outside of me and how I perceive them, right? I mean, that's what objective means, right? It exists whether I agree with them or not.
Right.
Like the earth is round. Hopefully we all agree that's an objective fact of the universe. I pray to God we're all there because we can verify that. And so
it's getting smaller by the day, though.
So for sure, but I also understand throughout human history, we've really debated the parameters of said what seems to be universal or common agreements, how we define murder versus killing. I mean, different countries in different contexts have different answers to that question.
Also, I this is not my expertise, so I don't want to get in the weeds here, but like the Bible and whenever the 10 Commandments were recorded, there were beliefs before that. Like one of the things that you assume as a fundamentalist is that because you believe that Genesis 1 is where the whole world started, you believe that the Bible was there since the beginning. You believe that there were people writing down maybe 100 years after the earth was formed. Oh, yeah, right, that's what happened, right? This is what happened. You assume that, but that's not how the Bible was written. And there were societies before the Bible was created, before the Torah was created, that had laws and ways of thinking about structures and morals and all that stuff. So that was kind of my point, was maybe at the very end of that entire, however many millions of years, evolutionary chain is some source of a transcendent divine being giving those things a moral law. But if that's the case, it certainly has gotten lost in translation today, because it seems like we're all arguing over everything, especially when you consider in the biblical world, things like pedastry, little boys with older men didn't seem that immoral. I'm not saying it isn't immoral. It obviously is. But again, that something at some point in human history changed where we went, actually, this is really unethical and really, really despicable behavior. But in the ancient biblical world, not really a problem. Neither was sleeping with your concubines or sleeping with your wife's maid or your woman's maidservant, right? There's a lot of things that we look back on there and go, these things were terrible. And they go, well, Tim, is there an objective law? Is there a moral lawgiver? If there is, they didn't do a very good job, especially around things like sex. Let's keep going. So we're almost done. Hey, we're almost done. Thanks for hanging in there. It means a lot.
About it. Answer to that question of what is murder and what is killing for self-defense or a legitimate reason.
Well, if it is, it seems like we're all in disagreement. So to certain levels of
but again, like you said, an objective definition is something that exists outside of ourselves. So does that exist?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Yes.
Who gets to define it?
Well, usually states and legal and law. I mean, right? Like, for example, the definition of murder in the U.S. is objective, meaning it exists beyond all of our framework. It lives somewhere on the books in code. Where that came from is probably other humans, but at some point we all agreed to it and we all sit underneath the jurisdiction of said laws. I think that there is objective morality for sure, but I also understand the complicated nature and debate that's been happening throughout human history about that objective morality. Just both and for me. So,
Kenton, I would like to ask you a question really quick, if you don't mind. Because there
Oh, boy.
are some even within the Christian worldview, and even smaller within the Christian Reformed or Calvinistic worldview, that take more of a libertarian stance, and excuse me, and you and Tim kind of touched on that just with the last verse. What would you say to someone who says, if you look back in Israel's past, you look back in the Old Testament, or even in countries when Christ was walking the earth, you had nations that said, and even Israel that said, yes, we serve God, but there was a sect within them that were not serving or worshiping God. They were idolaters, and they were doing different things, and they weren't necessarily put to death or run out of the country or put in prison. It almost looks like it might be a dual, more libertarian thing of, yes, we have these laws on the books.
I hate this
but there
question.
were sects of people, and even some foreigners inside of Israel that worshipped a different God. How do you think that aligns with your view of Christian nationalism being the one, conservative Protestant Christianity being the one and only true religion to rule civilly in a nation?
So if I understand, you're asking, under a Christian nationalist framework, does there exist a place for other religions in that nation?
That too, sure. or private lifestyles.
Yeah,
kind of what Tim was alluding to.
Okay, gotcha.
Oh, yeah.
I
would
would
good, actually.
affirm that understanding of it. If people want to, like, I'm not going to go knocking on people's doors and say, "Hey, there's a statue of Buddha in your back closet or on your
front porch,
dining room table." I'm not going to go in and send the stormtroopers in after them. I don't think that is a beneficial thing to do. What I will say is that I'm not going to have giant Hindu statues erected in the city of Houston. And so I would distinguish between public worship and private worship in that framework. And any private worship would be left alone. But any public worship, any erecting of idols would be not allowed.
Okay, Tim?
How is that congruent with what you said earlier about benefiting those people? You mentioned how the most loving thing to do sometimes can be to let people know that they're wrong. Obviously, I would imagine if you think someone's worshiping Buddha, that they're on the way to hell. So how is that good for them or for society under your own worldview that they're on the way to hell to let them keep worshiping that false god in peace? I don't understand that.
This is really important because, again, like this logic falls in on itself. So on one hand, Kenton's like, look, loving your neighbor is telling them the truth and doing things that you think are going to help them. On the other hand, Kenton's like, well, if someone wants to have a Buddha statue in their house, it's cool. But under Kenton's own worldview, they're on the way to hell. So how is that actually helping them without you enforcing that crazy rule? How does this work? Let's hear the response.
How is that beneficial for society or for them?
I don't think that, and this gets into the gospel, law or an edict cannot force someone to become a Christian, right? And so even if I went into that person's house and I tore down all the statues of Buddha and I rounded them up and put them in prison for worshiping Buddha, they're not going to become a Christian, right? They're just going to be a Buddhist in the prison instead of a Buddhist in their home. And so what I can do is I can order the laws of the nation to promote Christianity, and I can, as we are commanded to, I can preach the gospel to every creature. I can teach them about what
so
Scripture
confused
says.
by this answer.
The differentiation between public law and private responsibility. It is their neighbor's responsibility to bring the love and gospel of Christ to them, but we cannot change their hearts.
But you would also impose severe penalties for people who are practicing same-sex sex. So why for them, but not for the person worshiping Buddha?
Help me understand, Kenton.
Because I think those are two separate categories.
Well, yeah, you're right. In the Bible, worshiping false gods is quoted way more often with way more severe penalties than the 6 verses about perceived homosexuality. So I'm trying to figure out here, like, what's the motivating rationale for, well, you're worshiping Buddha, you're on the way to hell, but hey, live and let live, friend, versus the 2 gay guys in their house who are doing nothing to you or anyone else, just loving their
I think
partner, and that's problematic.
I think the only instance where I said I would go in affect the private life of a homosexual pairing is if there were children involved. Again, if there are 2 gay guys living within a home. I'm not going to call them married, and the state's not going to affirm that. But again, I'm not going to send the stormtroopers to them.
To be clear, earlier in that video, he did say that he wants them back in the closet and that they should be severely punished. Now, I didn't want to, again, there are so many things I could have pointed out, right? There are so many things I could have pointed out. I didn't want to get in the weeds on this, and we end in like 5 minutes, but wow, mind-blowing. Oh, okay, sorry, I thought earlier you said that you would promote like severe penalties or consequences, so I said
that homosexual lifestyle can lead to severe penalties, yes.
All right, we got 3 minutes.
Okay, we're coming up on an hour and a half, so how about we just give... two final statements of
here we go. This is it, friends.
People watching.
Hang in there.
Man, I tell you what, our numbers just kept going up and held steady. So you guys definitely gave the people what they wanted. No one was really jumping off. So, Tim, let's start with you. Just sum up maybe a minute or two, your final thoughts for those maybe who just came on and only caught half of it, kind of where you stand on, like we said, Christian nationalism. Is it good for society? You're in the firm no. Kenton is in the firm yes. So let's just put bookends on it.
Yeah, well, first off, props to Kenton. I definitely was, I definitely threw a lot at him and was pretty energetic, and he's calm and cool as a cucumber. So props to you, my friend. I really did enjoy the conversation. I appreciate your honesty and your transparency. And for the record, would happily do this conversation with the three of us again on any other kind of topic, including
I stand by that
so
for sure.
Thank you very much. And of course, thanks for hosting the podcast. It's really great to have you and to be on the show with you guys. Yeah, my position is pretty clear. I think that Christian nationalism, as we talked about it today and as we described it, is not beneficial for society. I do believe that, contrary to what Kenton says, he really is also picking and choosing which parts of the Bible are objectively true for God's moral law and which parts are not, based on all kinds of reasons. I'm not saying that they don't exist, but there's definitely an interpretation process to the Bible, like how all of us have, including myself. For me, as a Christ follower or a little Christ, I start with the teachings of Jesus and the gospel accounts, and I don't see anything in the life and teachings of Jesus that promotes power, taking power, ruling over others, lording over others, or trying to force them to do things that are beyond what they want to do. I do believe, though, however, in the teachings of Jesus, of loving our enemies, of being blessed if you're meek, of thinking about the powerless first and living among the marginalized and speaking truth to power. So that's kind of my position ultimately. And I do really hope that, we live in a country, whether we call it Christian or not, that truly does promote the well-being of all its neighbors, livable wages, affordable healthcare, affordable access to education, pro-family values that let mom and dad stay home with their kids more instead of working for some corporate job for unfair wages while they profit billions on the top. I'd love to see that rectified in my lifetime.
That really is. I'll let him finish it up.
We'll again, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate this, and I did enjoy the conversation. What I advocate for and what I want to see in our nation is an understanding that our world has been created by God, and that God has ordered society in a specific way, and that is our responsibility as his creation to adhere ourselves to what he has commanded for us. And so what Christian nationalism is simply saying that sovereign nations should adhere to what God has commanded. What Tim, I think, is advocating for is a very subjective worldview where there is no foundation. There is no understanding of God's moral commandments. There is no understanding of what God has commanded for his people and for the people of the world. Tim wants to create morality in his own image, and I think that has devastating effects on society. I think the only way to order society well is by ordering it according to what God has revealed to us.
Guys,
thank you all for having me on. I really appreciated this, and I enjoyed.
We'll end it there. I mean, listen, so subjective. Jesus, heal the sick. Me, guys, we live in the world's richest country. Can we get affordable healthcare done so we can heal the sick? You're so subjective. I know it is. I am radical. How dare I advocate for access to affordable education? I mean, how would that benefit society? How would that benefit society at all? Oh boy, friends, listen, first off, thank you for hanging out. I have a favor to ask. If you made it to the end of this live, I want to know, what time of day do you prefer these lives? I'm still working this out. I want to go live more often. I love doing it. I love being in the moment. I love having you watch with me. Are evenings better, daytime like this? Let me know in the comments. Maybe shoot me a DM. It would be really helpful. I really appreciate you hanging in there. I wanted to rewatch this because I remember thinking to myself, this was a very painful conversation to have because I just couldn't keep track of what Kenton was actually saying. So I wanted to watch it from the outside after a few months to kind of get my head around it. And yeah, it is, wow, it is just truly all over the place. And there's so much more that I could say. I do think it's really worth saying this last comment here. To be clear, Christian nationalism is what allowed the genocide of indigenous people, the enslavement of African people, the colonization of most of the world. I agree with that. I mean, the doctrine of discovery, right, which gives the Pope a ton of authority to conquer lands and to, tame the quote unquote savage. This idea goes into it. So I think that we're just seeing another iteration of that same ideology. Thank you so much for the super chat. I really appreciate it. Mid-morning or evening, late nights too. Oh God, late nights, you're gonna kill me. I'm East Coast. I'm debating maybe like an 8 p.m. live on like Wednesday nights or something. I'm debating it. I'm still working through it. But yeah, just let me know. I really enjoy doing this. Hey, friends, thanks for being here again. Make sure you sub to the channel if you haven't yet. I'll be back here next week. Don't forget, we're doing this. I have it right here. Next week, probably around the same time, to be honest, 'cause I already scheduled it. We're doing a live responding to Tim Barnett and Elisa Childers. Deconstruction is contagious. We're going to respond to some of their videos warning people, mainly parents, about the dangers of deconstruction. I'll have my friend and special guest, Dr. Kevin Carnahan, on with me to go through it. It's going to be really good. So, all right, friends, that's it. I'm going to take a break and use the bathroom. It's 2 hours. Jeez, I'm dying over here. Okay, talk to you later on. See ya.